If you've ever been silenced in a room you helped build, this story was written for you. If your strength was mistaken for obedience, your kindness for weakness, stay with us. We don't rewrite the past here, we reclaim it. Because survival isn't the end of the story. It's where we begin telling it right. And trust me, the next chapter, you won't want to miss it. He called me a guest, in the home I helped build with my silence, my sacrifices, my motherhood. But when they tried to erase me, one rule, one whispered plan at a time, I found something they didn't expect. A deed with my name on it. Now I'm not asking for a seat at the table. I own the table. And when your own child becomes your tenant, the real story begins. The silence in my son's house was the kind that hums in your chest. Too still to be comfortable, too loud to ignore. I told myself it was just the difference between my old place and this one. My house had creaky floors, the familiar clatter of a ticking clock, the steady hum of a life well lived. Garrett's home was all smooth surfaces and sharp lines. Everything inside it seemed afraid to breathe. I moved in on a Tuesday, early spring, but the chill hadn't yet let go. Garrett had insisted I not hire movers, said he'd help. I arrived to find his wife, Monica, arranging throw pillows that all looked the same to me. She smiled like someone trained to do it. Her eyes never quite met mine. Garrett came in late from work, kissed my cheek without touching it, then disappeared upstairs before I'd unpacked a single box. My late husband, Carl, had built our home with his hands. Oak shelves, a wide porch, the garden he never got to finish. After he passed, I couldn't walk the hallway without hearing his cough echo off the walls. It was too much. Garrett had said, "Why don't you come here, Mom? There's space." So I sold the house and brought only what I thought wouldn't get in the way. Just a few boxes, just me. I didn't want to be a burden. I told myself that every night as I folded laundry that wasn't mine, cooked dinner I wasn't asked to make, and tiptoed in the morning so as not to disturb Monica's quiet. I told myself they were grateful, just not good at showing it. People had different love languages. Mine had always been service. Theirs apparently was silence. They had rules here. Not spoken outright, but evident in every exchanged glance. Monica liked the kitchen a certain way. Garrett didn't want the thermostat touched. They had a cleaning lady I hadn't met, so I wasn't to clean anything deep. Garrett reminded me once, gently but firmly, that Lily, my granddaughter, had a bedtime and too much sugar made her hyper. That was after I gave her a cookie at 7 p.m. I stopped baking after that. Lily was the only light in that house. 7 years old, always with a book in her hand and 100 questions in her eyes. "Grandma, why don't you have your own room?" she asked one day. I told her I did. It just didn't have any of my things in it. She laughed, not knowing how true that was. My room had beige walls and a bed that felt too clean, not lived in, no pictures, no scent of lavender like I used to have. I kept my photo albums in the bottom drawer, tucked beneath my nightgowns. Garrett hadn't asked if I wanted shelves, and I didn't want to impose. I noticed it quickly, the way Monica would re-wipe counters I'd already cleaned, or how she never invited me along when they went to the park. Garrett, once so affectionate, now answered in clipped tones, checking his phone between sentences. I caught him once, whispering in the hallway. "She means well, but she doesn't know when to stop." Monica murmured back, too soft for me to hear. I stopped asking to help, started staying in my room more. I'd listen to the muffled sound of the dishwasher, Garrett's low voice, Monica's laughter that always seemed louder when I wasn't in the room. I wondered if they thought I couldn't hear, or if they didn't care. At night, I would stare at the ceiling and ask Carl, wherever he was, if I'd made a mistake. I missed the clutter of our old life, the mismatched mugs, the uneven shelves, the chair with one shorter leg that always rocked a bit. That house had flaws, but it had us. This house had order, but I wasn't sure it had me. One evening, I left a note on the counter asking if we could all have dinner together. Garrett replied via text, "We're out with friends tonight, maybe another time." The maybe stung more than I admitted. I heated up soup and ate alone in the kitchen. I washed the spoon, dried it, and placed it silently back in its drawer. I had thought moving here would bring us closer. That being near my son would ease the ache of Carl's absence. But this house wasn't a home. It was a space I passed through quietly. I began to feel like a shadow in my own life, present but not seen, existing but not belonging. I told myself not to be dramatic. That grief played tricks on perception. But every day, Garrett felt further away, not closer. I saw more of Monica's rules than Garrett's warmth. He had once needed me for everything. Now I wasn't sure he needed me at all. Still, I tried. I smiled when I passed them in the hall. I folded Lily's socks just the way Monica did. I kept my voice soft, my steps lighter. I stayed useful, helpful, invisible. Because somewhere in the quiet corners of my heart, I hoped he'd say, "I'm glad you're here, Mom." He hadn't said it yet, but I was still waiting. It happened over chicken marsala. The table was set just right. Monica always used the good dishes when they had guests. Funny, I thought, since no one else was coming. I had ironed the tablecloth that morning, peeled carrots, and set the wine out 2 hours early. It had been my idea. A proper family dinner, something to feel normal again. Monica poured Garrett a glass of Cabernet and didn't ask if I wanted any. I reached for the bottle, and she gently shifted it closer to her husband, as if I'd misunderstood something unsaid. The conversation was stiff, surface level. Monica talked about Lily's piano recital. Garrett mumbled something about work. New team, long hours. Lily was giggling at the way the sauce clung to her fork. Then halfway through a bite, Garrett looked at Monica and said, "Well, she's just a guest here. It's not like she needs to weigh in on everything." The room turned still. I blinked once, then twice. I set my fork down carefully, afraid it might slip from my fingers. Guest. The word sliced through the air like a verdict. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Monica cleared her throat and complimented the sauce. Lily reached for a napkin. I don't remember how the dinner ended. I only remember sitting at the sink after, scrubbing dishes that weren't dirty, water running too hot just to stay standing. A week later, Monica taped a list to the fridge. Shared living guidelines, neat bullet points, no late-night laundry. Dishes must be dried and put away immediately. Use only assigned pantry shelf. Limit TV volume after 8 p.m., all of them underlined. None of them discussed, and only one person was following them. I told myself it was her way of maintaining order. Maybe she was overwhelmed. Maybe she was trying to make things easier. But the way Garrett ignored the list completely, left cereal bowls in the sink, blared the news at full volume. It was clear who the rules were for. Me. Something started shifting inside me, something I didn't want to name. At first it was small. I noticed my spare keys had been removed from the hook. Garrett brushed it off, said Monica probably tidied up. Then the milk I bought started disappearing before I touched it. I began labeling my groceries with a small dot. They still vanished. Once, I caught Monica staring at me as I made Lily's lunch. Her eyes drifted to the peanut butter, the bread, the baggies, as if calculating what I was using, what I cost. I smiled. She didn't smile back. I retreated. I stopped cooking altogether. Ate cold toast for breakfast. Sat outside during lunch. Began walking in the evenings, even when it rained. I needed the space. Not just from them, but from myself. This shrinking version of me that kept asking, what did I do wrong? The past came back in fragments. Long nights at the diner, the ache in my legs after double shifts, the way Garrett clung to me when I'd pick him up from daycare, the way I'd rehem his school uniforms by hand, just to save enough for his college fund. I had done everything, sacrificed everything. So how had I ended up here? There was a night, maybe 2 weeks after the dinner, when I passed their room on the way to the laundry. The door was slightly ajar. I didn't mean to stop, but I heard my name. "She's not going to leave unless we make it uncomfortable," Monica whispered. Garrett's voice followed, low and edged. "She's used to guilt-tripping me. It won't work. I'll talk to her this weekend. She needs to start looking for a place." My legs went cold. I held the basket tighter so it wouldn't fall. Then I walked past, carefully, like a ghost who had just discovered it was dead. That night, I lay awake until sunrise. I didn't cry. Not at first. Not until Lily padded into my room around 7, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She crawled into my bed and curled against me. "Grandma," she whispered, "why do you cry at night?" "I heard you." I held her tighter than I should have. I couldn't answer her. I didn't know how. The next morning, I decided to clean out the last box I'd never touched, Carl's papers. I had avoided them for months, not because I feared the memories, but because I feared what wasn't left. Inside the box, tucked beneath old tax files and oil change receipts, was a plastic folder with our signatures in blue ink, a property title, a deed, my name and Carl's, and under it a second signature, Garrett's. It was the land outside Charlottesville, the one we'd bought as an investment, cheap at the time, but Carl had always said it'd grow in value. I'd forgotten it existed, but there it was in writing. Garrett's name had only been added for credit purposes, but the ownership, still mine, still mine. I sat there for nearly an hour, rereading every line. The paper trembled in my hands, but something inside me began to steady. Something inside me began to steady. Maybe I didn't have a home anymore. Maybe I was just a guest in my son's life, but I was not powerless. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel small. I felt angry. I folded the documents neatly, placed them in a manila envelope, and tucked them into my handbag. There were things I could still claim. I was 17 when I told my parents I was pregnant. My mother slapped the casserole off the dinner table before she said a word. My father didn't look up from his newspaper. They didn't ask me who the father was. They didn't ask if I was okay. They asked where I planned to live because it sure as hell wasn't going to be under their roof. I still remember the feel of that front door closing behind me, the metal handle cold in my palm, the air stinging my cheeks. I had $40 in my purse, a half-packed duffel, and a baby in my belly I hadn't even named yet, but I had already decided I wasn't going to give him up. That child was mine, even if no one else wanted him. I slept on a friend's couch for a month before I found a studio apartment in the back of a converted Victorian. Peeling paint, squeaky floorboards, the whole thing smelled like mildew. But it had a lock, a toilet, and a stove. I thought I was rich. I got a job waiting tables at Penny's Diner, an old railcar joint just off Route 18. My name tag said Lori because the full name wouldn't fit. I worked the breakfast shift, eggs, coffee, pancakes by the dozens, until my ankles throbbed and my back screamed. I'd get home, nap, then pull out my secondhand textbook and teach myself debits and credits until midnight. Garrett was born 2 weeks early on a freezing January night. No father, no baby shower, just me, clutching a borrowed blanket, whispering apologies to a boy who hadn't even opened his eyes yet. He was beautiful, mine. By the time he was 5, I'd passed my bookkeeping certification and landed an assistant job at a tax prep office. I worked weekends and holidays to pay for a spot at St. Martin's Elementary. It wasn't fancy, but it had good teachers and no gang activity. I packed his lunches with hand-cut fruit and wrote notes on his napkins. "You are braver than you feel. Be kind, be strong. I love you." He never mentioned them, but I kept writing them anyway. Garrett knew early how to get what he wanted. He'd hug me longer when asking for something expensive. He'd sulk when I said no, but never outright yell. He had a way of sighing like the world disappointed him, like I had. Once, when he was 12, he told me, "Other kids get to go to Disneyland. You just give me books." He didn't say it cruelly, but it cut anyway. I worked overtime that year just so he could go with his friend's family over spring break. When he came back, he barely said thank you. In high school, he started calling me Lorraine in front of his friends. Said Mom sounded childish. I laughed it off, but the word lodged itself in my throat after that. I paid for his SAT prep courses, bought him a suit for college interviews, and drove him to every campus tour in a rusted sedan that coughed smoke on every hill. He got into a decent state school. I cried the night the letter came. Garrett just shrugged. "I guess it'll do," he said. He moved out at 18. I helped pack his dorm things and tried not to cry as he rolled his eyes every time I offered advice. The calls got shorter, the visits rarer. By the time he was a junior, he had stopped asking how I was doing altogether. He met Monica at school. I heard about her in passing. He called one day and said they were getting married. I didn't even know they were engaged. "I guess you're invited," he added like an afterthought. "But Monica thinks it's better to keep it small. Just friends." I didn't go. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with a wedding card and a blank line inside. I wrote, "I hope you're happy," and mailed it with a check. He never cashed it. My living room still has the crayon drawings Garrett made as a kid. Stick figures labeled me and Mom with huge lopsided smiles. I kept every one. In a small plastic bin under my bed were his kindergarten paintings, a crumpled spelling bee certificate, and the Pinewood Derby car we made together. Now they're in a box at the back of the closet in Monica's house. I haven't opened it since I moved in. Judith, my sister, used to say I loved Garrett too much. "You're building your whole life around him. What happens when he stops needing you?" She'd asked me once during an argument over Thanksgiving dinner. She walked out before the turkey hit the table. We haven't spoken since. Maybe she was right. Back then, I had dreams. I wanted to be an accountant, maybe open a small business, tax help for single moms like me. But Garrett always needed something, a new bike, a tutor, a fresh start. And I always told myself, it's not a sacrifice. It's what mothers do. The dream shrank, then disappeared. What I never expected was that one day, my son wouldn't just stop needing me. He'd start resenting me for ever having been there at all. The first time I noticed the phone angled toward me, I was rinsing out a teacup. I'd left it in the sink overnight. A slip, nothing more. When I turned around, Monica was there casually scrolling through her phone, but I saw the little red light blinking. She smiled, said nothing, and walked away. That night, the list on the fridge had a new item in bold. All dishes must be washed and put away immediately after use. The next morning, I caught her doing it again, propping the phone up on the windowsill while I folded towels. The light blinked, 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 like a silent metronome counting the seconds of my imperfection. I began checking corners before I did anything. Laundry? I double-checked the machine timer. Refrigerator? I made sure I didn't move anything out of place. I stopped using the dishwasher altogether, just in case she wanted to log my settings. My body tensed every time I heard her footsteps in the hall. Garrett was worse. He'd snap over small things, a light left on, a lukewarm cup of coffee, a towel not folded the right way. One afternoon, he came home early to find Lily and me watching an old movie. I hadn't realized the volume was a bit loud. He didn't raise his voice, but the way he spoke froze the room. "We've talked about this. You're overstepping," he said. "If this keeps happening, we'll have to look into assisted living? Something more appropriate for your needs?" Appropriate. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I just nodded, turned the volume down, and later sat on the edge of my bed until my legs went numb. That night, I didn't sleep. My mind spun in loops. Did I leave the iron plugged in? Was the oven clean? Did I forget to take out the trash? I started keeping a list by the bed. I'd check things 3-4 times. Still, I'd jolt awake at 3 a.m., heart pounding, convinced I had left something out of place. I began journaling. At first, it was just to keep track. Notes on what I'd done, what time, what Garrett had said. Then it became a place to breathe. I wrote to Carl, to God, to myself. Pages filled with half-thoughts, questions, pleas. Sometimes I wrote the same sentence over and over. "I am not crazy. I am not crazy." Lily began slipping notes under my door. At first they were simple. Drawings, a smiley face, the word, "hi." Then they became longer. "I like when you braid my hair. I miss pancakes. Why are you sad, Grandma?" And one evening, just after I'd been accused of misplacing a towel Garrett had left in his gym bag, "I love you, Grandma. I'm glad you live here, even if Mom says you're difficult." That one made me cry. Quietly into my pillow, with the door locked. I had started locking my door at night, another small act that didn't go unnoticed. Monica tried the handle once and said through the wood, "This is a family home, Lorraine. We don't need to lock doors here." I didn't respond. I waited until I heard her walk away. Later that week, I pulled my old wedding album out of the storage bin Monica had relegated to the garage. She had said it was too dusty for the hall shelf. I cleaned it with a soft rag, carried it back to my room, and placed it on the nightstand like a relic. Inside were my memories, my proof, my worth. Carl's smile, the simple backyard wedding, Garrett as a baby, cheeks round and eyes wide. I ran my hand over the plastic sleeves, every photo a thread tethering me to who I'd been before I became invisible. I told myself, this is real. I am real. The next morning, I made a call. It took me days to find the courage. I told Garrett I had an errand and took the bus to the other side of town. 3 transfers, 2 hours, a world away from the sterile walls of their perfect house. The attorney's office was small but neat, tucked between a bakery and a pawn shop. His name was Elliot Mercer, an old colleague of Carl's who still handled estate cases. I hadn't seen him in over a decade. He listened patiently as I laid out the situation. I showed him the deed from the folder, the co-signed property outside Charlottesville, the journal entries documenting my treatment. When I was done, he leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Legally, he said, you are the sole owner of the property. Garrett's name is a co-signer, not a co-owner. He has no claim. In fact, if he's living there without your consent or under false pretenses, you could file for eviction. I could evict my own son? I asked, my voice half hollow. You could, he said. And if he's threatening your safety or attempting coercion, you could also seek a protective order. This qualifies as psychological abuse, Lorraine. The words didn't sink in right away. Abuse, protective order, eviction. I had come in looking for a lifeline and left with a sword. On the ride home, I held the folder close to my chest. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. Not entirely, from recognition. For the first time, I understood what they were doing to me. It wasn't just unkindness. It wasn't just a rough patch or miscommunication. It was control, deliberate, measured, calculated, and I wasn't going to let it continue. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes, softer than I remembered. Weeds poked through the driveway, curling along the edges like forgotten thoughts. The porch steps groaned under my weight as I walked up them, slow and cautious, like visiting a ghost. My old property near Charlottesville hadn't been touched in years. The white paint had peeled to gray. The shutters hung crooked. The mailbox leaned sideways, the flag rusted in place. But I remembered every inch of it. Carl planting marigolds along the edge, Garrett kicking a ball against the siding, the sunlight through the maple trees on long summer evenings. It wasn't much, but it had been hours. I stood on the porch for a long time, fingers grazing the worn railing. I had sold it after Carl died. Garrett told me it was the smart thing to do. No point letting it rot, Mom, he'd said. We can use the money to get you something better. Let me handle it. I let him handle it, like I always had. I crossed the street to find someone who might know what had happened since. The Taylors had lived there forever. Sure enough, Mrs. Betsy Taylor answered the door in her usual apron, surprised but smiling when she saw me. Lorraine Whitaker, as I live and breathe, she said, pulling me into a soft hug that smelled of cinnamon and fabric softener. Lord, you haven't changed a bit. She poured us tea in her kitchen, same floral cups she'd always used, and we sat across from each other as though no time had passed at all. I heard Garrett sold the place, she said gently. Didn't fetch what it was worth, I bet. That land's worth triple now. I remember your Carl said it was a good long-term hold. I blinked. Triple? Oh, at least. But Garrett was in a hurry. Young man came by a few weeks later to flip it. Said your son just wanted a quick sale. Shame, that property had heart. Her voice faded as the realization hit me. Garrett hadn't sold the house because I needed to move on. He'd sold it because he needed the money. And he had done it knowing I wouldn't question him. Knowing I trusted him with everything. Knowing I'd been too exhausted to comb through the numbers or question the timing. He had used me. Again. I left the Taylor's house with a weight in my chest that I couldn't shake. But this time, the weight didn't anchor me. It moved me. Michael Dorsey's office was in a red brick building downtown, sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a florist. The place smelled of old carpet and strong coffee. He was younger than I expected. 40s, wire-rimmed glasses, crisp white shirt. But he listened without interrupting, eyes sharp, pen moving steadily across his legal pad. I reviewed the documents Mr. Mercer forwarded, he said after I'd finished. Your husband's will gives you sole surviving ownership. Garrett's name was never on the title post-sale. He may have acted as agent for the transaction, but legally, he has no claim. I swallowed hard, and I can reclaim it? Yes, he said. It's not complicated. A title transfer, some paperwork. You're well within your rights. But Lorraine, are you prepared for what this means? I looked at my hands. They didn't shake. Yes, I said. He nodded once and slid a document across the desk. I recognized the layout immediately. Title of ownership. The name Lorraine Whitaker typed neatly in the center. All I had to do was sign. And I did. The courthouse was colder than I expected, even in spring. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I sat in the waiting area outside the clerk's office, clutching my leather-bound journal like a shield. Inside it were weeks of notes, fragments of my sanity, written proof of everything I hadn't said out loud. When they called my name, I stood with a grace I didn't feel and walked through the door like a woman stepping into her own shadow, finally ready to look it in the eye. I signed the necessary forms under oath, reviewed the documents with the registrar, asked every question twice. When the final signature line appeared before me, I paused just long enough to feel the pen settle between my fingers. Then I wrote my name, deliberately, boldly, Lorraine Whitaker. It was done. The deed was mine again, mine. I stepped back outside, the afternoon sun cutting across the concrete like gold. I didn't cry, not then, but I exhaled so deeply it felt like the first breath I'd taken in months. I wasn't done, not yet, but I had just reclaimed the ground I was standing on. The door clicked shut behind me, louder than it needed to be. I placed my purse gently on the hallway table and walked through the foyer as if I were stepping onto a stage I hadn't set foot on in years. My shoes barely made a sound against the polished floors. Everything was in its place. Monica's matching vases, Garrett's framed diploma, the silence that had become a second skin. But today, I wasn't afraid of breaking it. Garrett was in the living room, laptop balanced on his knees. He looked up briefly, then back down. "You're late," he said, not bothering to ask where I'd been. "I wasn't aware I had a curfew," I replied. That made him look again. Longer this time, narrower. "I just meant, never mind." He waved it off like he was brushing away a mosquito. "Dinner's in an hour. Monica made a new chart." I stepped closer, hands at my sides, the manila folder peeking out from under my arm. "I won't be here for dinner," I said. "Actually, I won't be here much longer at all." He blinked. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said calmly, "I'm moving out. And I have plans." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Plans? You mean you found a room at some senior center that still accepts Medicaid?" I didn't flinch. "I won't be going to any center," I said. "I'll be moving into my own property, the one I reclaimed 2 days ago." Garrett's smile faltered, just slightly. "What property?" "The Charlottesville land, the one you sold below value in my name while pretending to act in my interest." His face drained color so subtly, I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching. "That's not—" "Mom, that was years ago. It wasn't like that." "I know exactly what it was like," I said, "and I have the documents to prove it." I pulled the folder out and placed it gently on the table. Garrett didn't touch it, just stared. "I've transferred the deed back into my name, effective immediately, and yes, I've had the title verified by 2 attorneys." His mouth opened, then closed. He looked behind him as if Monica might come rescue him from this moment. "She knew?" I asked before he could speak. Garrett hesitated. "Not exactly." I nodded. "She will now." Dinner was quiet. Monica served pasta and salad like it was any other Wednesday. Lily picked the olives out with careful fingers. Garrett stabbed at his food. Monica's eyes flicked between us like she knew a storm was hovering just behind my silence. I placed my journal on the table beside my plate. "I've been keeping records," I said softly, "of everything that's happened since I moved in. Photos, notes, timestamps, including instances of verbal coercion, passive isolation, and consistent gaslighting." Monica's fork clinked against her plate. "What are you talking about?" Garrett snapped. "I'm talking about the psychological abuse you've been inflicting. The rules, the surveillance, the threats. You thought I was too fragile to see it, but I'm not." I turned to Monica, and I know I'm not the only one in this house who's being manipulated. Monica's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. Don't do this, Garrett said, his voice dropping into a warning. You're making things worse than they are. No, I said, steady. I'm naming them for what they are. That's when Lily stood up. She walked around the table and wrapped her arms around my waist. Don't go, Grandma, she whispered into my side. I stroked her hair, blinking fast. I'm not leaving you, I said. I'm just finding a better place. For both of us. Monica looked up sharply. What? I met her eyes. I'm offering you and Lily a lease. At my property. Separate from Garrett. I've already had it drafted. You'd be protected. No hidden surveillance. No controlling behavior. Garrett stood up so fast his chair scraped the tile. You've got to be kidding. I'm not, I said. I'm protecting myself. And your daughter. Monica looked at him, her face pale. Garrett, she said, voice breaking, you told me your mother was unstable, that she needed us to supervise her. She does, he insisted. She's exaggerating. She's always done this. No, I said, rising from the table. I've always loved you. That's what I did, even when you twisted it into something else. Monica stared down at her plate, then slowly stood. I'll think about the lease, she whispered. Then louder. Thank you. Garrett's fists clenched, but he didn't say another word. I gathered my folder, my journal, and Lily's hand. I wasn't a guest anymore. I was a woman taking back her house, and her name. The apartment wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, beige walls, the faint smell of old paint, but it was mine. The key felt heavy in my hand the first time I turned it, a quiet click echoing through the empty space like a promise. The landlord, a kind woman named Eileen, had included basic furniture. A couch that sagged slightly in the middle, a queen bed with floral sheets, and a kitchen table big enough for 3. There was a mirror near the front door. When I looked into it that first night, I didn't see the woman who'd walked on eggshells down her own hallway. I saw someone trying to remember how to stand tall. I unpacked in silence. No Monica hovering, no Garrett barking questions. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the steady rhythm of my breath. I hung one picture, Carl and me on our wedding day, above the nightstand. The wedding album stayed in the drawer, but I placed my journal on the table, its worn leather cover the only thing I'd carried daily for months. I opened it and wrote. I made it out. The next morning, I dialed a number I hadn't used in 20 years. Judith answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was slower than I remembered, sanded down by time. Hello. It's Lorraine, I said. I thought maybe we could talk. Silence, then a soft intake of breath. I hoped you'd call someday. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our towns. She was smaller, thinner, hair streaked with gray, but her eyes were the same. Watchful, cautious, kind. We didn't talk about Thanksgiving, or the years lost, or the long, stupid pride that kept us apart. We talked about her garden and my granddaughter, and how loud the world had gotten. Then, between sips of lukewarm coffee, she said, I should have stood by you back then, when Mom and Dad threw you out. I wanted to, but I was afraid if I defended you, they'd throw me out too. I reached across the table and took her hand. We were both just girls trying to survive, I said. Judith nodded, eyes misty. Still are, maybe. After that, we met weekly. Her presence felt like stitching back a torn seam, not perfect, but whole again in its own way. I started writing too. Not just journaling, but real writing. A memoir, my story, the things I'd never said, the truths I had choked on to keep the peace. I wrote during the afternoons, sunlight pouring in from the small balcony, the sound of children playing in the distance. My fingers ached, but my spirit felt light. 2 weeks after I moved out, Monica called. He's unraveling, she said. The house is falling apart, literally and figuratively. She and Lily had moved into a motel. Garrett had yelled when she packed, called her ungrateful, said she was choosing an old woman over her own husband. She didn't fight back. She just left. He doesn't even look like himself, she said, voice shaking. I think he's breaking. I didn't say I saw it coming. I didn't say, welcome to my world. I just said, you did the right thing. The confrontation had happened on a Sunday. Garrett had come home late the night before, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. Monica confronted him with Lily in her arms. She told him she knew about the videos, the documents, the lies. She had seen his search history. How to remove someone from a home legally. She told him she was done. He'd screamed, punched a hole in the pantry door, told her she was nothing without him. Lily had cried. Monica had packed. The motel wasn't much better than my apartment, but I offered to help cover their costs until the lease on the Charlottesville property was finalized. I don't want your charity, Monica said. It's not charity, I said. It's me making sure Lily has a place that's safe. That's all that matters. Then came the call I'd been expecting. Garrett. He didn't even say hello. I lost my job, he said, voice low and panicked. HR called this morning, said my numbers were off, my clients weren't happy. They're restructuring. That's their word for it. I waited. I need help, Mom, just for a little while. I just need a place to get back on my feet. A year ago, I would have dropped everything. I would have sold my jewelry, taken a loan, begged the bank, but not this time. No, I said. Calm, clear. He went silent. Are you serious? He asked. You'd really turn your back on your own son. You did it first, I said. Every time you shut me out. Every time you made me feel like I was disposable. He scoffed. So you're punishing me now? No, I said. I'm protecting myself. There's a difference. A pause. I don't have anywhere else to go. I wanted to say, you never made space for me, not once. I wanted to say, Lily cried in my arms while you plotted my removal, but all I said was, then maybe now you'll understand what it feels like. I hung up before I changed my mind. That night, I added a new line to my journal. Saying no is not cruelty, it's survival, and for the first time in years, I slept through the night. My therapist's name was Ruth. She had kind eyes, a quiet voice, and a room filled with soft pillows and lamps that made the space feel like a storybook corner instead of a sterile office. The first time I walked in, I told her I didn't think I had much to say. She smiled and said, then let's just start with silence. That silence stretched into hours over weeks, and then slowly it became sentences. Sentences became memories, memories became truths. I told her about the dinner where Garrett called me a guest, the way Monica taped rules to the fridge like I was a tenant in my own son's life, the notes Lily slipped under my door. I told her about Carl, about the wedding album, about my sister Judith and the cost of silence. Each session felt like peeling off a mask I'd worn too long, one shaped like patience and motherhood and quiet suffering. I began to see myself in sharper focus, not just as a mother or a widow, but as a woman who had survived the storm and was now ready to step into her own weather. Twice a week, I volunteered at the local community center. I taught basic budgeting to single mothers, helped them build resumes, guided them through forms the world had never explained to them. They reminded me of myself at 22, tired, hopeful, terrified. I wasn't trying to save anyone. I was just holding the door open. And one day, on my way back from a session, I passed Penny's diner. It looked the same. Same worn sign, same faded booths. But the for sale notice in the window was new. I stared at it for a long time. The place where I'd once scrubbed grease off counters, counted tips in my apron pocket, and rehearsed lullabies for Garrett while waiting for the lunch rush to end, was empty. 2 weeks later, it was mine. I used most of the remaining proceeds from the Charlottesville property to buy it. Friends at the community center helped me clean it out. Judith brought flowers. Monica painted the front door a bold, unapologetic red. Lily picked the name, The Margins Cafe, a space, she said, for people who live on the edges but deserve the middle. The inside was nothing like it used to be. I lined the walls with shelves of secondhand books, installed soft lighting, cushioned chairs, vintage rugs, a kid's reading nook. Every piece of decor had texture and warmth, like a living scrapbook. It didn't just serve coffee, it offered refuge. My apartment began to change too. I painted the walls sunflower yellow and navy blue, hung up curtains with floral prints, tacked up Lily's drawings alongside black and white photos of Carl and me dancing barefoot in the kitchen. I bought a quilt for my bed, hand-stitched, each patch a different shade of red. Every stitch felt like a breath, like color returning to lungs long starved. Lily visited every weekend. She'd bring her own notebook, sit cross-legged on my rug, and ask, "Can I read more of the book today?" I'd hand her my laptop, and she'd read my memoir aloud in that small, serious voice children use when they want to sound older than they are. Sometimes she'd stop and ask, "Did that really happen?" Other times, she'd quietly underline words she didn't know and look them up later. It became our ritual. Monica would come by too. She never stayed long, but her presence was steady. She'd help with inventory, restock napkins, or just sit on the back porch with a mug of tea and her thoughts. One afternoon, we stood in the alley behind the cafe, watching dusk fall. I handed her a sweater I kept by the door for chilly evenings. She took it and said, "I didn't know how bad it was. I knew something was off, but I didn't know." "You were surviving too," I said. "We both were." She looked at me then, really looked. "You saved me, Lorraine. You and Lily. You gave me permission to walk out." I nodded. "And you stayed gone. That's the brave part." We didn't say anything else, but something settled between us. Not friendship, not exactly. Something older, stronger, a shared resilience. A few nights later, I got an email. Subject, "Your voice deserves a stage." At first, I thought it was spam, but the signature was real. Amelia Grant, literary agent with Fireline Publishing. She'd come across a short excerpt I'd posted anonymously on a community forum. Something about invisible mothers and the cost of silence. She wanted to read the full manuscript. 2 weeks later, she called. "I think this story could change people," she said. "And frankly, I think it could be a film." I sat in my kitchen, phone to my ear, staring at a half-filled cup of tea, heart thudding in my chest. "It's not just about abuse," she added. "It's about reclamation. It's about the women who clean up after generations of emotional wreckage and still find beauty in the mess." I didn't cry. I just said, yes. After the call, I opened my laptop and wrote a new line in the manuscript. I used to think survival was the end of the story, but now I know it's only the beginning. The guest room wasn't supposed to be mine, but now it was, not in the way Garrett meant it years ago, some hollow title to keep me quiet. This time, it was mine because I had made it so. I had chosen the paint, the curtains, the way the light filtered through lace every morning like a whispered hymn. I had chosen the shelves, stacked high with books that smelled of memory and freedom. I had chosen the photographs, framed and placed with care. Carl's crooked grin, Lily's gap-toothed smile, Judith and me laughing with mouths wide open and heads tilted back. A room of my own, finally. When Monica called, her voice was tentative. "The lease starts in 3 weeks," she said, "but the motel's raising the rate again. We're barely making it." "Come here," I said. "You and Lily stay with me until the house is ready." A beat of silence, then, "Are you sure?" "I wouldn't offer if I weren't." They arrived with 2 suitcases and a box of art supplies. Lily ran straight to the corner nook I'd set up for her. Beanbag, sketch pad, a little cubby labeled Lily's Corner in hand-drawn letters. Monica stood in the doorway, clutching a duffel, eyes glassy. "I can take the couch," she said quickly. "No," I replied. "You'll take the guest room. It's time it meant something better." The days that followed settled into rhythm. We took turns cooking. Monica started making breakfast. Strong coffee, eggs just the way I liked. Lily read me chapters from the books I used to read to Garrett. Some nights we played board games. Others, we sat in companionable silence, surrounded by the soft hum of something I'd forgotten the sound of. Peace. One evening, I found myself sitting in the remodeled room, the one that used to hold my silence. Now it held my story. I traced my fingers along the spine of an old volume of To Kill a Mockingbird, one Carl had given me when we were first married. Above the desk hung a framed quote in delicate script. "You are not too much. You were never too much." It had become my mantra. I no longer needed permission to belong. That's when I saw the envelope. Plain, white, addressed in Garrett's handwriting. It had no return address, but I recognized the way he curled his R's, something he'd done since elementary school. I opened it slowly. "Mom, I'm writing from a rehab center outside of Richmond. I don't know how long I'll be here." It's court-ordered after the altercation with Monica. I lost my job, I lost my family, but mostly I lost myself, and I think that started long before any of this. You didn't deserve the way I treated you. None of it. I wish I could say I knew better, but I didn't want to know. I needed you to be the problem so I wouldn't have to be. I hope you're okay. I hope Lily's okay. If you're willing, I'd like to talk again someday. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'd like to earn something back. Maybe honesty, maybe time. Garrett, I read it twice. Then I folded it neatly and placed it inside my journal. I didn't cry. I wrote back that night. Garrett, I'm glad you're safe. I'm glad you're facing the truth. That's a hard thing to do. I know it firsthand. We can talk, but only if there's no guilt, no pretending, only honesty. That's the only thing I will allow in my life now. I don't hate you, but I've stopped bleeding for you. If you're ready for that kind of conversation, write again. If not, that's okay too. Either way, I wish you peace. Mom, I sealed the envelope, placed it on the hall table, and breathed deeply for a long time before walking away. The next morning, Judith came over early. We had planned this for weeks, a book club meeting at the Margins Cafe, themed around stories of generational trauma and resilience. It was our first co-hosted event. The cafe was warm with laughter and quiet tears as women, some older, some barely out of college, shared their own truths. One woman read from a letter her mother never sent. Another spoke about how her daughter saved her life. We served tea, passed tissues, and watched people realize they weren't alone. Judith leaned over and whispered, "Do you realize this is exactly what you needed 20 years ago?" I smiled. I know, and now it's what we give. Later, Lily curled up beside me on the cafe couch, head on my shoulder, whispering, "I like this house better than the old one." Me too, I said. She looked up. "Is this your house, Grandma?" I paused, then answered, "It's ours." And for the first time in a long, long time, I believed it. The notary's pen moved slowly across the final page, her neat script looping over my name, Lorraine Whitaker, and then to the line just beneath it. Lily Annette Roswell, my granddaughter, my legacy. The estate documents were simple, but their meaning was everything. Joint ownership, equal rights, the house, the cafe, the savings, all with her name beside mine. Not to burden her, not to trap her, but to remind her she would never again have to wonder where she belonged. "This is just in case," I said as I handed Monica a copy. "If something ever happens, Lily won't be waiting for someone else to define her place in the world." Monica's eyes welled. "She'll never forget what you've done for her." "She doesn't need to," I said. "She just needs to live well." 3 weeks later, the cafe was filled to the brim. People spilled out onto the sidewalk, folding chairs brought in from the community center, warm lights strung above the windows. A small stage had been set, floral arrangements, soft amber lamps, and behind me, a slideshow looping silently, images from every decade of my life. There I was, at 17, holding infant Garrett, dark circles beneath my eyes but smiling. There I was at my wedding in the faded yellow dress Carl loved so much, holding a spatula at Penny's, sitting beside Judith on a park bench, reading to Lily in the cafe nook. The final photo. Me in front of the cafe door, arms crossed, eyes lifted. My truth at last. The reading began. I stood behind the lectern, my manuscript neatly stacked, breath caught in my throat for a moment before I began. I was told, not in words but in silence, that motherhood required disappearance, that to love meant to shrink, that to belong meant to never take up space. I looked out at the crowd, Monica near the front, Judith beside her, Lily holding a little notepad and drawing something quietly, rows of strangers leaning in. I wrote this book because I want women like me to remember that survival is not selfish, that we do not need permission to call something home, that we do not need to prove we matter. Soft gasps, silent tears. One woman held a hand over her heart, another reached for her friend's hand. As I continued reading, I spotted him. Back of the room. Hat pulled low, arms crossed, still, watching, Garrett. He stood alone, half hidden behind a column, not looking for attention, not moving, just there. My voice didn't falter, not this time. I finished the chapter, about leaving his house, about reclaiming my name, about Lily's note beneath the door. I thanked the audience, stepped down, and hugged Judith tightly. Monica kissed my cheek. Lily clung to my waist. When I looked again, the back of the room was empty. He was gone. I hadn't stopped reading. I hadn't called out. I let him leave. That was the restoration, the choice not to chase him. Not because I didn't love him, but because I finally loved myself more. Later that night, I opened my journal. Today, I spoke my truth out loud. They listened. I thought I was losing my family. I was saving myself. And in doing that, I gave Lily something Garrett was never given, a legacy of wholeness. We build again. We build better. Mornings began with the sound of the percolator and Lily's soft humming as she set the table. The sunlight hit the windows at the perfect angle, warming the floor where my slippers always found their spot. Monica left early for her social work classes. Judith often dropped off new books for the cafe shelves, and I'd spend the first quiet hour in my armchair, wrapped in a knit shawl, reading the newspaper front to back. Peace wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It came gently, in routines that expected nothing but gave everything. I was happy, and then Garrett's lawyer called. He requested a meeting. No demands, no drama. Just a conversation, he said. We met at Michael Dorsey's office, the same room where I'd first claimed my name back on paper. I arrived 5 minutes early, sat in the chair across from the oak conference table, and waited without nerves. Garrett walked in alone. He looked thinner, paler. He wore a blazer that didn't quite fit right, as though it belonged to a version of himself he hadn't grown into yet, or had long outgrown. His hands stayed folded on the table. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. "Garrett," I replied, neutral but warm. Michael nodded to both of us, then opened the folder between us. As discussed, Lorraine now has full property rights over the Charlottesville home. Garrett has vacated the premises. The purpose of today's meeting is to review the final estate management transition and confirm the landlord-tenant status moving forward. Garrett didn't interrupt. When the review was done, the final documents placed before me, I signed each one slowly and deliberately. I turned to Garrett only when everything was finished. "I never wanted to be your landlord," I said. "I wanted to be your mother, but you made a choice I can't forget, even if I've forgiven." He swallowed hard but said nothing. I leaned forward slightly, not angry, not cruel, just clear. "You're not a guest. You're my son, but I'm no longer your doormat." Garrett nodded. "I understand." There was no dramatic apology, no tears, just two people sitting across a table, each owning what was theirs. I stood, extended my hand. He took it, not tightly, not weakly, just honestly. As I stepped out of the office, Michael held the door for me. "You've come full circle," he said softly. "Not quite," I replied, "but I've walked far enough to call this peace." That afternoon, I returned to the cafe for the evening poetry reading. Lily helped light the candles. Monica greeted guests with soft laughter. Judith brought a tray of lemon bars and an armful of new titles for the shelf. And later that evening, as twilight brushed the horizon in watercolor streaks, I stood in the doorway of my home. The same posture I once took at Garrett's front door, suitcase in hand, heart in my throat. Only this time, I was not waiting to be let in. This time, I was welcoming myself home. The cover was simple, linen-textured, pale blue, the title stitched across in bold serif, "Just a Guest Underneath" by Lorraine Whitaker. It hit shelves in indie bookstores first, then online. A few weeks later, I walked into a shop downtown and saw a small placard in the window. "Staff Pick, a story of survival and self-worth." I didn't cry. I simply stood there, hand resting on the glass, the words reflected back at me. I remembered typing them late at night, hunched over the laptop, Lily sleeping beside me, Judith gently snoring on the couch, the quiet hum of a house filled not with fear, but with care. The story was no longer just mine, and I was no longer just a guest in my own life. At home, my days moved slow and soft. The cafe was thriving, community events growing with every new week. Judith ran the weekend book club. Monica had just finished her second semester of social work training. Lily was working on a mural for the cafe's children's corner, a tree of open books with branches full of birds. And I kept writing, sometimes essays, sometimes poetry. I kept therapy appointments, hosted readings, and made time for silence. That winter on my birthday, Lily handed me an envelope. It was pink with uneven hearts drawn across the front and "To Grandma" written in all caps. Inside was a letter, written carefully in her tidy cursive. Dear Grandma, you taught me what strong looks like. It looks like saying no when it's hard. It looks like walking away from people who hurt you even if you love them. It looks like speaking even when your voice shakes. It looks like you. I want to be strong like you. Love, Lily. I held the paper to my chest and felt something settle inside me. Something rooted, permanent, not just love, not just pride, legacy. That night, I placed a new note inside the guest room. The room Monica once called mine out of pity. The room I later turned into a space of welcome and softness. The note sat on the dresser, framed in walnut. You are always welcome, but never at the cost of my peace. It wasn't a warning, it was a truth. A truth I'd earned. Later that evening, after the house was quiet and the wind picked up outside, I moved through the room slowly. Lights dimmed, books returned to their shelves, a blanket folded, teacup rinsed, a final entry added to my journal. It was never about being let in. It was about realizing I never had to knock. Home was never the walls or the people who withheld it. Home was always me. I turned off the last light, walked to my bedroom door, and locked it with a quiet click. Then I smiled. Not because I had something to protect anymore, but because I finally knew it was mine. If you've ever been silenced in a room you helped build, this story was written for you. If your strength was mistaken for obedience, your kindness for weakness, stay with us. We don't rewrite the past here, we reclaim it. Because survival isn't the end of the story. It's where we begin telling it right. And trust me, the next chapter, you won't want to miss it.